In 1828, a 19-year-old villager set foot in the bustling city of New Orleans for the first time, completely mesmerized by the towering buildings and massive ships in the docks. But what struck him even more deeply were the scenes of human cruelty that unfolded before his eyes. He witnessed men and women, enslaved and shackled, being sold like cattle in the open market, with advertisements plastered on the walls for slave auctions. These advertisements specifically warned buyers to bring cash, as slaves were not sold on credit. All of these slaves were black, and they were being bought and sold by their fellow countrymen, the white Americans. The sight haunted this young villager deeply, and although he could do nothing at that moment, he vowed that one day he would bring an end to this despicable practice. But to accomplish such a monumental goal, he knew he would need to rise to power. He needed to become the most influential man in America. And despite all the hurdles he faced, the mission succeeded. But how did this young villager, who had no wealth, no connections, and no position of power, ultimately change the course of history? This is the story of Abraham Lincoln and how one man, born into a life full of failures, rose to become the leader who would alter the fate of an entire nation. At TruthLine Documentaries, in this video, Who Was Abraham Lincoln?, we delve deep into Lincoln's early life and the obstacles he overcame. Let's begin in this small town of New Salem, nestled along the Sangamon River in Illinois. It was here that Abraham Lincoln spent the first years of his youth. But even in these humble beginnings, Lincoln would face some of the greatest failures of his life. He was born into a poor family and suffered the loss of his mother at the young age of 9. His mother died from poisoning after consuming milk tainted with a toxic herb, and soon after, his father remarried. Though Lincoln got along well with his stepmother, his relationship with his father was strained. His father often mocked him, and Lincoln was subjected to physical abuse, which left scars, both physical and emotional, that would stay with him for years. Despite these hardships, Lincoln had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. Though he never received a formal education, he managed to teach himself to read and write, often memorizing passages from the Bible and Shakespeare's works. But his academic endeavors had their limitations. Mathematics remained a subject he never quite grasped. And despite his towering 6 feet 4 inches frame, Lincoln never considered himself a handsome man with scars on his face that made him self-conscious. His accent was another challenge, making him feel out of place when speaking. Yet, he was an extraordinary speaker, and this would prove to be one of his most powerful tools in the future. At the age of 22, Lincoln moved to New Salem, where he became a storekeeper. The town was small, about 100 residents, and Lincoln's shop became a place where locals came for their daily goods. But the store soon ran into financial problems, and Lincoln lost his job. This marked his first failure. However, Lincoln had earned something invaluable: his reputation as an honest man. One day, a woman purchased goods from him, and after she left, Lincoln noticed that the scales he used to weigh her goods were incorrect. Without hesitation, he went to her house to make amends, giving her extra goods to make up for the error. The people of New Salem soon began calling him Honest Abe. His honesty would prove to be a defining feature. Throughout his life, this reputation of honesty led Lincoln to run for a position in the Illinois State Assembly in 1832. Confident in his local support, he believed he would win. However, despite his good reputation, he lost the election. This was his second major failure. At 23 years old, Lincoln had no money and no food. He worked as a laborer, a postman, and even tried his hand at surveying. But none of these jobs satisfied him. Eventually, Lincoln challenged the town's wrestling champion to a match. Though he lost the fight, he gained the wrestler's sympathy, and the man became one of Lincoln's closest friends, aiding him in his future political career. In 1834, after years of struggle, Lincoln won a seat in the Illinois State Assembly. This was his first taste of success after years of failures. But the financial struggles continued. Lincoln earned only $3 a day, which was barely enough to cover his expenses, and he couldn't manage his store while working in the assembly. The following year, tragedy struck again. His business partner, William Berry, passed away, leaving Lincoln with a heavy debt of $1,800. Lincoln later joked that this debt was his national debt, and it took him 15 years to pay it off. But Perhaps the most heartbreaking loss came with the death of Anne Rutledge, a young woman Lincoln had fallen deeply in love with. Though Anne was engaged to another man, Lincoln's feelings for her were profound. They spent time together, often meeting by the banks of the river. But, tragically, Anne succumbed to typhoid fever. Lincoln's grief was intense. He visited her grave often, and for the rest of his life, he carried the memory of her death with him. After moving to Springfield, Lincoln's life began to take a more promising turn. He became a successful lawyer, earned enough money to pay off his debts, and married Mary Todd, a woman from a wealthy family. But even with these accomplishments, the issue of slavery continued to trouble him, haunting him since his youth. The institution of slavery had long been a point of contention in America, dividing the country between the North and the South. Although Lincoln had made a name for himself as a lawyer, his heart was still with the abolition of slavery. The northern states were industrializing, and slavery had become an economic hindrance, but the South depended on slavery to fuel its agricultural economy. The nation was divided, and Lincoln couldn't ignore the moral and political implications of slavery. In the 1850s, the slavery debate came to a head, leading to a civil war. In the heat of these political battles, Lincoln found himself embroiled in the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, which would solidify his standing as one of the leading voices against slavery. Lincoln's arguments were powerful and impassioned, and even though he lost the election for Senate, his name became synonymous with the fight against slavery. In 1860, Lincoln was nominated by the Republican Party to run for president despite his recent defeats. His campaign was marked by his staunch opposition to slavery. When he was elected president, his victory sparked the secession of Southern states from the Union, and the Civil War soon followed. As president, Lincoln faced unimaginable challenges. The country was on the brink of destruction, and he was tasked with preserving the Union. His journey to Washington was fraught with danger, including an assassination plot in Baltimore. But despite these threats, he succeeded in taking office. Lincoln's determination to abolish slavery became more resolute, and on January 1, 1863, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in the Confederate States. His leadership through the Civil War, along with his unwavering commitment to his ideals, made him one of the most revered figures in American history. The story of Abraham Lincoln is one of resilience, triumph over adversity, and the power of a single person to change the course of history. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will continue to explore the monumental impact of Abraham Lincoln's leadership. This is TruthLine Documentaries, where history's most fascinating stories come to life.